Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys, let's watch ABC News in depth, preemptive like. France has spent decades preparing for Trump. If you're listening, ABC in depth. I'm assuming if you're listening is the name of his thing here. So I know what the topic's gonna be, especially with the thumbnail right here. You have de Gaulle. The French gentleman, senator, I believe, I listened to his speech and reacted to his speech in French Parliament, French Congress, and one of his lines is that we are something about like you have a Ukrainian de Gaulle and an American Pétain. I'm kind of butchering what he said there, but my point is that you have Philippe Pétain, who was a World War I hero, I believe, for France in World War I, but then in World War II, once France was conquered by Germany, and the Vichy France was made, right, which was an puppet state area in France, in the internal France, kind of center and south east of France. And Pétain seemed only too easy to accept defeat and cooperate with Hitler and become the kind of puppet leader of Vichy France. And so that being Philippe Pétain, and then you have de Gaulle, who is the opposite, who is a sort of never surrender, I'm not capitulating. I believe he went to Great Britain while France was still occupied by Germany. And so the message there was that you have de Gaulle, who was very independent post-World War II, during World War II, and post-World War II. And a lot of other countries were much more on the side of the U.S. in terms of like taking their lead for international affairs and diplomacy. And France from the beginning was like, this isn't a good idea. Of course, America and others helped liberate France and everything, but you can't expect France to then just bend the knee and be like, okay, I'm just under the American thumb, you know? France knew that from the start, and I admire that a lot. I'm sorry if I butchered a lot of that, especially if I misspoke a bit about what the French senator said, but I thought that was interesting. Anyways.
Sucks about election night coverage pretty much one of the things that sucks about election night coverage pretty much everywhere is this bit.
So we should be hearing from the Prime Minister.
Every time my internet, I just got to restart it.
One of the things that sucks about election night coverage pretty much everywhere is this bit.
So we should be hearing from the Prime Minister pretty soon.
Obviously, we're still waiting to hear from Kamala Harris.
It's the bit where the result seems pretty clear, but you've got to wait around for ages until the leaders do their speeches.
And we're waiting to see John Trump appear himself, and that's obviously what the crowd there are waiting to see.
Well, this bit doesn't happen in Germany. All this waiting around is way too inefficient for the Germans. They bring all the party leaders into one room at 8 o'clock on election night and make them answer questions about the race.
Bundeskanzler, der noch amtierende Olaf Scholz. Guten Abend.
Guten Abend. Guten Abend, everyone. When this chat was underway during the election just last month, it was pretty clear that opposition leader Friedrich Merz was going to be the next chancellor. And he decided to start his transition into office with a bang.
Union und für mich wird absolute Priorität haben, so schnell wie möglich.
He says, my absolute priority will be to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible so that step by step we can really achieve independence from the USA. It's clear that the Trump administration is largely indifferent to the fate of Europe.
And the French senator pointed out how that was an admission that France was right all along.
People were stunned. Usually a German leader needs to be at least 3 schnapps deep before they start heckling their most important security partner. But Germany could no longer afford to ignore Trump's actions since taking office. Forcing Ukraine to agree to a ceasefire, threatening to annex Greenland, and saying that US allies have to pay up if they want US protection.
No, I won't protect if you're not paying. If you're delinquent or if the money isn't paid, why would we do that?
One person who would not have been surprised at all by what Trump is doing is the French statesman Charles de Gaulle. The dominant figure in 20th century French politics, de Gaulle thought it was only a matter of time before America would become, as the Chancellor says, indifferent to the fate of Europe. Now, America's allies are calling France and asking two questions. One, how did you see this coming? And two, can you protect us?
Okay, right here.
America would now, how did
Paying.
have to pay up if they want US protection.
No, I won't protect if you're not paying. If you're delinquent or if the money isn't paid, why would we do that?
He's thinking like a businessman right now, okay? Which he is, but he's president now. And so that viewpoint right there, you might be right that if there is a 2% threshold in military spending for NATO and that's required, then sure, countries that aren't paying 2% yet should start trying to increase that to what was agreed upon for NATO members, right? But him saying, well, if you're not paying, then why should I protect you? Why would we?
One delinquent or if the money isn't paid, why would we do that?
Because you're a leader of a country and not a leader of a business. That might make sense. But businesses can't, okay, he's treating me badly, go to another business and then threaten you with war, okay? So saying that is like, yeah, I would love countries to pay the 2%, but if you say that, then why would they be in NATO if they can't make the 2%? And then they could go more towards your adversaries. And then that's worse, way worse, than them being with you but not paying as much. Him saying that is extremely frustrating and worrying.
One person who would not have been surprised at all by what Trump is doing is the French statesman Charles de Gaulle.
Damn right.
The dominant figure in 20th century French politics, de Gaulle thought it was only a matter of time before America would become, as the Chancellor says, indifferent to the fate of Europe. Now, America's allies are calling France and asking two questions. One, how did you see this coming? And two, can you protect us from a rising Russia and China if America won't? I'm interested in finding answers to these questions too. I'm Matt Bevan, and this is If You're Listening.
I'm listening. Stay hydrated, guys.
Dans le malheur qui s'abat sur la patrie, faut avant tout qu'une chose soit dite.
This is the sound of desperation. It was mid-1940 and German forces were at the gates of Paris, and the French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud took to the airwaves.
Sorry, guys.
Is the sound of desperation.
Faut avant tout qu'une chose soit dite. Le malheur.
Sorry, guys. Sorry.
Dans le malheur qui s'abat sur la patrie, faut avant tout qu'une chose soit dite.
This is the sound of desperation. It was mid-1940 and German forces were at the gates of Paris, and the French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud took to the airwaves to beg America for help.
Quand l'ennemi avait cru briser les nerfs,
He had already failed in his attempt to get the US to join the war against Germany, and now he was begging for a cloud of planes to be sent to stop the Nazis.
les souffrances et la fierté de la France.
Planes had been promised, but they weren't ready in time. America would not save France. The following day, on the same frequency where the Prime Minister had begged for help, the French national anthem La Marseillaise played for the last time. You can hear attempts by the Germans to block the frequency with their own broadcasts. Paris had fallen. France would surrender within days. Shortly afterwards, though, there was a new French voice on the airwaves, broadcast from England. The voice was unfamiliar, even to most French people. It belonged to General Charles de Gaulle, a minor cabinet official who had flown to London rather than surrender, declared "I am France," and urged people at home to form a resistance against Nazi occupation. Initially, the Americans ignored him, but he made that very difficult to do.
Jesus Christ, how is that guy really short or is he really tall?
Initially, the Americans ignored him.
How tall is Charles de Gaulle? Maybe he's just short?
But he made that very difficult to do. He was an imposing figure, 6'5", with the physique of an asparagus.
6'5", okay. And back then, that's like 6'9" today.
And he wouldn't take no for an answer.
General de Gaulle, leader of the Free French Forces, inspects French naval vessels now in English ports and soon to go into action against the Axis.
Eventually, he was accepted by the Allies as the leader of the French resistance and joined the Allies in liberating France.
I take this opportunity to thank the American people for the wonderful effort they have made to win this war.
Great English.
Like many French people, de Gaulle did not like speaking English, but to rally support for France,
well, he's really good at it for not liking it.
He would do anything.
Today, as in 1918, your American boys are fighting side by side with the French soldiers.
This kind of speech makes you think that de Gaulle was a big fan of the Americans.
Together, we are marching on the road to Berlin, to Tokyo, to a final victory.
But he wasn't. It's not that he was anti-American, he just didn't trust them. He never forgot their lack of response to the plea for help in 1940. 21 years later, Paris looked very different, and America had a new president.
Paris in the spring of 1961, at the time of President Kennedy's visit, was as beautiful as ever.
I'm surprised they didn't bring up the Suez Crisis. Didn't that happen in the 50s?
"21 years later, Paris looked very different, and America had a new president.
Paris in the spring of 1961, at the time of President Kennedy's visit, was as beautiful as ever.
De Gaulle was now president of France, but he hadn't changed at all. He was still stubborn, proud, very tall, and skeptical of American leaders. It was John F. Kennedy's first overseas trip as president, and it was off to a great start. 2 million people gathered on the streets of Paris, mainly to see the glamorous French-speaking American First Lady.
I do not
French.
think it
Didn't know
altogether
that.
inappropriate to introduce myself to this audience. I am the man who accompanied Jacqueline Kennedy to Paris, and I've enjoyed it.
But it wasn't all fun and parades for President Kennedy. He had 7 hours of meetings scheduled with de Gaulle, and they were not expected to be easy. After all, the two had many pressing issues to discuss.
The attention of an anxious world is focused on East and West Germany and Berlin.
The Soviet Union was consolidating its military position in communist East Germany, and de Gaulle wanted to know what would happen if they sent their forces into democratic West Germany. France, West Germany, and the US were all members of the NATO alliance, which meant that if one was attacked by the Russians, all of them would retaliate together. But de Gaulle was skeptical. Would Russian troops on Allied territory be enough to trigger a nuclear response from Washington? If Soviet troops marched all the way up to the Rhine River, the border with France, would Moscow be flattened by an American bomb? De Gaulle thought it should be. He thought that Soviet troops on the bank of the Rhine was an existential threat to France. But he thought that at the critical moment, Kennedy would chicken out. The Rhine is much narrower than the Atlantic, said de
I'm gonna watch another video soon after this about I think it was, should Poland get nukes or something like that. And this is a thing that is a little, that bothers me, or something about NATO or any alliance, that with this nuclear scenario, let's say that Russia uses a nuke on a country in NATO. Would America nuke Russia? And would it? Because you have to think, nuclear weapons are so destructive. Do you trust America to let go of the possibility of itself being nuked in order to honor the treaty and nuke Russia? I don't know if you can do that, and
de Gaulle.
If you can rely on that.
The Rhine is much narrower than the Atlantic, said de Gaulle. This was basically de Gaulle's position on the entire Western alliance. The Americans talked a big game, but if push came to shove, they'd abandon Europe and focus on their own problems.
France has suggested that the U.S. might no longer be willing to meet its commitments in Europe. Mr. Kennedy pledged that the U.S. will remain in Europe as long as desired or required.
Kennedy assured de Gaulle that the US would always defend Europe, as if it was part of America.
We cannot fail these commitments. We cannot surrender the freedom of these people, for whom we are responsible.
He went all the way to Germany and declared,
all free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
But de Gaulle was never...
Someone told me that was his misspeak, that meant like, I am a donut or something like that. Ich bin Berliner?
Convinced. But de Gaulle was never convinced. After all, he knew what happened last time the French begged for America's help. When you're convinced that America is going to leave you high and dry again, there's really only one thing you can do.
Get your own nuke.
Atomic weapons under de Gaulle, and he insisted on her right to be an independent nuclear power, to build nuclear submarines and maintain a fleet of bombers.
Also, you know that Ukraine, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union had loads of nuclear weapons, a lot of which still were in the territory of Ukraine, and Ukraine didn't want to give them up. But then the USA guaranteed that, you know, if you give these up, then we will protect you. What did we protect them? No, we didn't. So words don't matter that much when it comes to nuclear weapons, especially. And if the Ukraine kept those nuclear weapons, I'm not sure Russia would have ever invaded.
While other European nations were reliant on the US for much of their military technology, France spent an enormous amount developing its own force de frappe, which is a military thing and not an iced coffee. De Gaulle was so confident in France's military capacity that he demanded that all foreign troops, including Americans, leave French soil. The US Secretary of State asked him if that included all the Americans buried in French military cemeteries after dying to liberate de Gaulle's country. The Americans decided just to wait for de Gaulle to die, which he did in 1970. In 2017, incoming French President Emmanuel Macron had his official portrait taken in his office. As they prepared to take the photo, he turned to the desk and grabbed a book, opening it to a specific page and laying it on the desk so that it would be by his right hand in the picture. Pretty unoriginal thing to do, arranging relevant books on your desk to make a point about what you're talking about. But anyway, it's fair to say that Macron hasn't moved on from de Gaulle. The book was Charles de Gaulle's memoir, and he was placing it on Charles de Gaulle's desk.
We want to be open, we want allies, we want good friends, we want partners, but we always want to be in a situation to choose them.
Independent.
Not to be 100% dependent on them.
Macron wants to be able to choose France's partners, not be dependent on them. Of all of America's partners, one country has an almost opposite approach to
Germany.
France.
America has no better friends anywhere
Oh, the
in
UK.
the world than Australia.
Australia signed up to the US Defence Subscription Service at the end of World War II and has never missed a payment, buying American weapons, helping their spy agencies, sending soldiers to fight alongside them in distant war zones. But much like you used to only need one streaming subscription to watch everything, and now you need like 5,
Sponsor?
Australia started shopping around.
This is the largest and most ambitious military project in Australia's history, and it is a matter of great moment.
A deal struck with France to provide Australia with a fleet of submarines.
A dozen submarines, known as the Attack class, to be built over decades, with a $50 billion price tag.
The deal made perfect logical sense if your aim was to buy submarines to protect the Australian coastline.
Then
the
the
submarines
Americans.
would be diesel electric, meaning they run on batteries which are charged every few days by a diesel generator, which needs refueling every few months.
And then America was like, we'll give you nuclear submarines.
They are perfect for patrolling the continent that their home base is on, meaning they're perfect for defending Australia. And yet, 2 years after the contract was signed, the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison was saying this to President Macron.
I made it very clear that a conventional diesel-powered submarine was not going to meet Australia's strategic requirements.
So we're going to get American nuclear
In
ones.
2021, Australia tore up the contract with the French government and announced that it would be entering a new one with the UK and the famously stable and reliable US as part of an alliance called AUKUS.
Thank you, Boris, and I want to thank that fellow down under.
And thank you, Boris, and thanks, champ. I know your name. God damn.
Thank you very much, pal.
For the French, this was...
Thanks, pal. You don't know my name, do you? What? Yes, I do, champ.
Yet another betrayal by the Anglos. President Macron accused that fella down under of lying to him.
Do you think he lied to you? I don't think. I know.
Despite Australian claims that the submarines were no good or that they were going to go way over budget, there wasn't anything actually wrong with the French subs.
There was no cost blowout. They have been terminated because our requirements have changed.
So Australia's requirements just changed. Like when I bought a 5-seat car before finding out that our third kid was twins and we would actually be needing 6 seats. So now, instead of needing diesel-electric submarines to defend our coastline, we apparently now needed nuclear-powered submarines, which are capable of operating anywhere in the world, staying underwater for months, and only need refueling every 25 years.
Submerge the ship, dive, aye. Dive.
Instead of paying $7 billion per sub, we were now going to be paying up to $46 billion per sub. It's like replacing a ferry with an ocean liner. It's massive overkill. It makes no sense at all unless you look at it from an American perspective.
I think particularly for the United States, their aim in making this really significant gesture from their point of view of giving us access to this very sensitive technology is to enhance our capacity to support them in a war with China.
This wasn't really about submarines.
I'm going to give... I don't know a lot about this stuff, but you can't discount the fact that it could be the fact that Australia does also see a coming tension with China, and so wants to be able to have their own force, their own fleet of submarines and ships to be able to go further than their own coastline. And so maybe the video is right that, you know, they're doing it because the U.S. is trying to goat them into helping them. But doesn't Australia have its own concerns with China, not just the USA? So I think just calling it blanketly, not calling it, you know, something that Australia might actually want, rather than just some ruse by the USA to get them more involved with China, I think could be a stretch.
At all.
In a war with China.
This wasn't really about submarines at all. It was about upgrading our standard US defence subscription to the premium package. Someone threatens Australia? Well, they're our AUKUS partner. Saddle up, cowboys. We're going to go and help them out.
We have now strategically moved firmly back to our traditional Western Alliance partners.
How do you like them poms, de Gaulle? Almost from the very beginning, though, there were some questions about whether or not this was a good idea. But then...
Putting the orcs in AUKUS.
Discussing AUKUS with the Prime Minister, sir.
What does that mean?
AUKUS, the Australia-US Defence Alliance.
So we'll be discussing that.
As President Trump was making clear that he didn't know what our $300 billion AUKUS partnership was, the Chinese Navy started circumnavigating Australia, just to show that they could.
They're testing us as US allies. They're testing the Prime Minister.
And then, well, Trump abandoned Ukraine. See our last episode. What's that noise? This is Charles de Gaulle singing, by the way. The guy apparently loved a sing-along of La Marseillaise. 6 decades after Charles de Gaulle was the thorn in America's side because he was convinced that they would abandon Europe, it now seems like America might be abandoning Europe.
Wait a minute. No. You've done a lot of talking.
While the US president hasn't officially torn up any global alliances yet, everyone who relies on the US is in a panic and looking for someone else to protect them. In early March this year, Emmanuel Macron, who sadly does not love leading sing-alongs, addressed the French people.
Françaises, Français, mes chers compatriotes, je m'adresse à vous ce soir en raison de la situation internationale.
He said that thanks to choices made by his predecessors, de Gaulle, France has a special status with Europe's most effective military and its own independent nuclear deterrent. He said after a request from the incoming German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, he was opening a discussion.
Before you say that the UK also has nuclear weapons, that's true, but I've heard that all of the UK's nuclear weapons rely on American-made missiles to deliver them. And so that I think that's why France is the only truly independent nuclear power in Europe.
The incoming German Chancellor,
besides Russia, obviously.
Independent nuclear deterrent. He said after a request from the incoming German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, he was opening a discussion about France protecting its European allies with its nuclear capabilities.
Les Ukrainiens et plusieurs autres partenaires européens et que j'ai été défendre.
He said, I want to believe that the United States will remain at our side, but we must be ready if this is not the case.
Vive la République, vive la France.
And other European powers have followed suit, announcing that they will be dramatically increasing their defence spending. Meanwhile, in Australia, defence and security experts are recommending that we might need to find alternative sources of submarines because they're concerned those AUKUS subs may never arrive, much like the cloud of planes never arrived in France in 1940.
America is back. Thank you so much.
Even if Trump never officially abandons these defence arrangements, the ironclad confidence that America's friends had in their alliance with the US is gone, and it will take a long time to build back up. In the meantime, the countries that currently rely on the American nuclear deterrent, like Japan, South Korea, and Germany, are seriously considering acquiring their own nuclear weapons. This is all while Donald Trump says that he wants to talk to Russia and China about decreasing the global number of nuclear weapons.
We were talking about denuking, and President Putin and I agreed that we were going to do it in a very big way.
A lot of US allies are concerned that they've made a terrible mistake in putting their trust in America. Does France think that we've made a mistake?
I don't think. I know.
So, does anyone have the number for that French submarine company?
I'm going to say this again. Yes, France was right. De Gaulle was right. Accepting the Marshall Plan That is one thing, okay, that I'm not saying you shouldn't have done, but I admire France enormously because of this. And yeah, they're more confrontish to the United States. That's a good thing if you're another country. Like, you want independent. The USA should want more independent countries from them, so that it should be a mutual benefit. The USA now has more partners that can fight for their own, and those partners now can fight for their own without relying so much on the USA. And with more military independence comes more diplomatic independence. Love France. Love you guys. Hope you're all doing well. Would appreciate any comments down below. That was very enjoyable. See you guys next time. Bye.